back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode.
For this deep dive, we're zeroing in on a potential shift in U.S. travel policy. It's something that could have far-reaching consequences, so we want to break it down for you in a way that makes sense.
We're talking about a new framework for travel restrictions that's being considered by the Trump administration. It's still in draft form, but it's pretty extensive. Could affect a lot of people.
Yeah, the scope is what really caught our attention. It's based on a draft list that's been circulating within the administration, and according to folks familiar with the matter, we could be looking at restrictions impacting travelers from up to 43 countries.
Right. We have to emphasize that this is a draft, so things could definitely change. But it's worth taking a close look at what's being proposed.
Absolutely. And what makes this potential ban different is the tiered system they're considering. A red list, an orange list, and a yellow list, each with varying degrees of limitations.
So today, we're going to try to untangle this whole thing for you. We'll lay out which countries are involved, what the reported reasoning is behind their inclusion, and what the potential implications might be. We want to bring some clarity to what's going on.
Okay, so let's dive right in. First up, the red list. This is the most restrictive tier, and it's essentially a total ban on entry to the United States.
Yep. No entry allowed for nationals from these countries. Pretty straightforward, at least on the surface.
And according to this draft, 11 countries are on that red list. Afghanistan, Bhutan, Cuba, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. Quite a mix.
It is. And it's interesting to note that Afghanistan wasn't on those first travel bans that the Trump administration put in place during his first term, but now it's included.
Makes you think, right? I mean, after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and with the Taliban back in power, it does make you wonder if there are heightened concerns about security risks and whether the vetting process for individuals coming from there is seen as reliable.
Yeah, those are definitely factors to consider. But then you have a country like Bhutan also on that red list, and that's a bit of a head-scratcher.
Right. Bhutan, it's a small, peaceful nation nestled in the Himalayas. It's actually known for prioritizing gross national happiness, which is kind of cool. But to see it lumped in with countries facing serious internal conflicts and political instability raises some questions.
Definitely. We don't have any immediate insight into why Bhutan would be included in this most restrictive category. It's true that many of the countries on this red list share certain characteristics, like being predominantly Muslim majority or having governments that are considered weak or corrupt.
But Bhutan doesn't really fit that profile.
Exactly. So it seems like there might be other less obvious factors at play, things that maybe haven't been publicly outlined. Could be related to data sharing, security protocols, who knows? It does make you wonder about the specific national security concerns that might be driving this decision.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what kind of deficiencies in vetting or screening could they be pointing to when it comes to Bhutan? It's a bit of a mystery. But let's move on to the orange list. This one's a little less severe. Travel's not completely banned, but it would be restricted.
Yeah, they're taking a more, I guess you could say, nuanced approach with this tier. Based on the draft, it looks like standard tourist visas and immigrant visas could be limited, but affluent business travelers might be exempt or have an easier time.
So basically, they're drawing a line based on the reason for travel and maybe even how much money you have. Interesting. The orange list currently has 10 countries on it: Belarus, Eritrea, Haiti, Laos, Myanmar, Pakistan, Russia, Sierra Leone, South Sudan, and Turkmenistan.
Russia on that list really jumps out, doesn't it? Considering how the administration has talked about Russia in the past, sometimes even seeming to downplay any worries about them, this potential restriction might signal a shift in their thinking.
It's definitely something to take note of. Could be they're acknowledging some specific risks, maybe related to espionage or other national security concerns when it comes to travelers from Russia.
Possibly. And there's another layer of scrutiny being added for people applying for visas from these orange list countries.
Oh yeah, that's right. They're proposing mandatory in-person interviews.
Yeah. Seems like they want a more hands-on assessment of those applicants, probably trying to address any perceived weaknesses in the existing vetting processes by having consular officers meet with these individuals face-to-face.
Makes sense. Now, the yellow list is a whole different ballgame. It includes 22 countries that would basically be given a 60-day warning.
A 60-day grace period, you could say. During that time, they have to address what the U.S. administration sees as deficiencies. Otherwise, they risk getting bumped up to the red or orange lists.
It's like they're putting these nations on notice. shape up your security protocols, improve your information sharing with the US, or face stricter travel consequences for your citizens. Kind of a high-stakes situation.
Definitely adds a layer of pressure. And when we talk about these so-called deficiencies, what are we really talking about?
Well, based on the information we have, it seems like there are a few main things they're focused on. Failing to consistently share traveler information with the US, not having strong enough security measures when issuing passports, and even countries that sell citizenship to people from nations already facing US travel bans.
So trying to close that loophole.
Yeah, exactly. They're concerned about people finding ways to sidestep those existing bans by getting a passport from a different country.
Which, raises the whole issue of passport security on a global level. How reliable are these national ID systems? It's a big question.
Absolutely. So the 22 countries currently on this yellow list are Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cambodia, Cameroon, Cape Verde, Chad, the Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Dominica, Equatorial Guinea, Gambia, Liberia, Malawi, Mali, Mauritania, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, São Tomé and Príncipe, Vanuatu, and Zimbabwe.
I notice a lot of those are in Africa and the Caribbean. Maybe the U.S. administration believes those regions have more widespread issues with traveler vetting and information sharing, at least based on whatever criteria they're using.
Interesting observation. So how did we even get here? What's the backstory to this whole potential travel ban?
Well, it all seems to stem from an executive order that President Trump issued earlier this year. This order basically instructed the State Department to pinpoint any countries where they felt the vetting and screening information is so deficient that it justifies either partially or fully suspending entry for nationals from those countries. And they had 60 days to come up with a report.
And that 60-day deadline is probably why this draft list is now making the rounds. It puts the spotlight on the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs, who's likely leading this whole effort. But they're also working with other agencies like the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Makes sense. You'd want input from all those different perspectives when assessing how effective other countries' security measures and information sharing are.
For sure. But as we delve deeper into this potential travel ban framework, there are some big questions that still need answers. Questions that would directly affect people's lives. Like, what happens to individuals who already have valid U.S. visas? Would those visas be canceled?
Right, that's a major concern. And what about lawful permanent residents, green card holders? Would they be exempt from these new restrictions? The draft proposal we've seen doesn't really give us any clear answers on those points.
So it leaves a lot of people in limbo.
It does. But we can look to past examples and general legal principles to maybe get some idea. Governments usually reserve the right to revoke visas, but those actions can be challenged in court, arguing things like due process violations. And green card holders, because they're lawful permanent residents, usually have more protections. But even those aren't always ironclad, especially when national security is involved.
Right, and that case we talked about earlier where a green card was canceled, even though it was for different reasons, it does show that this administration is willing to take action on immigration status, even for people already living in the U.S.
Yeah, it definitely suggests they're taking a pretty comprehensive approach to immigration and security, that's for sure. And we can't forget about all the legal challenges those previous travel bans faced. The early versions were blocked by the courts, remember? But then a revised version eventually went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they allowed it to be put into action.
So it's safe to say that any new travel ban would probably also face legal hurdles. People could argue discrimination, due process issues, maybe even that the president is overstepping his authority. All those things have been brought up before.
It's important to keep those potential legal challenges in mind when trying to understand the full picture. This isn't happening in a vacuum,
Absolutely. And this whole situation is a stark contrast to what happened when President Biden took office. He immediately revoked those previous travel bans, even calling them a stain on our national conscience.
Which really underscores how different those two administrations are when it comes to their approach to this issue. Their philosophies and priorities when it comes to national security and immigration are worlds apart.
Definitely a big policy divergence there. Now, the current administration, their stated reason for bringing back these types of bans is to protect American citizens from terrorism, national security threats, the spread of hateful ideologies, and to prevent people from exploiting U.S. immigration laws.
Right. And it's important to remember that that's their stated reasoning. Now, when you look at these proposed lists, some of those countries were, in fact, included in those previous travel bans, and they do share some broad characteristics, as we've discussed.
But like we talked about with Bhutan, It's not always crystal clear why each country is on there, at least not based on the publicly available information.
And our job here is to just report on the information as it's presented. We're not here to offer opinions or try to sway anyone's thinking. Some folks might see patterns in those listed countries. Others might question why certain countries are included. But all we're doing is laying out the details of this draft proposal and exploring what it might mean. We're trying to be as objective as possible.
Exactly. So to sum it all up for you, the Trump administration is currently looking at a draft proposal for a new and potentially more extensive travel ban. It involves this three-tiered system with red, orange, and yellow lists, which could affect up to 43 countries.
The red list is a complete no-entry zone. The orange list means restricted entry with more scrutiny. And the yellow list gives countries 60 days to fix what the U.S. sees as problems.
And we still don't have all the details on how this would affect people who already have visas or green cards. A lot of unanswered questions there.
It's all stemming from that executive order that aimed to identify countries with supposedly weak vetting procedures. It's a bit of a throwback to those earlier travel bans, but it might end up being even broader, and it's definitely got this new tiered approach.
Now, here's something to think about as you process all of this. You've got this wide range of countries on these lists, some with well-known security issues, and others where it's not so clear why they're included. So what does that tell you about how complicated it is to create national security policies that try to find that balance between protecting people, navigating international relations, and respecting individual rights?
It's a really important question. The fact that these countries are all so different really makes you think about what criteria are being used and what the consequences might be for global travel and diplomacy if these broad restrictions are put in place.
This deep dive has given you a glimpse into what's happening, but remember, things are still unfolding. We encourage you to stay informed by checking out reliable news sources and to consider all the different viewpoints that are part of this important policy discussion.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.